Hi, everybody, and welcome to our webinar this afternoon. I'm very pleased that we have a lot of folks who are registered to attend, and we're still letting folks in who are in the waiting room. And but I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and so I'm going to go ahead and get started here. And if we have folks joining as the next few minutes, then that's totally fine. To introduce myself, I'm Nicole Gaines. I'm the NIMAC Project Director, and I'm also joined by Liz Schaller, who's the NIMAC Manager. She's going to be assisting with monitoring the chat for any questions. And also, I wanted to let folks know that this presentation is going to be recorded, so it will be archived, and we will also archive the PowerPoint. So if you are interested in having it going forward, it will be available to you. If you could just keep yourself on mute. If you're not asking a question, that would be great. But if you do have a question, I would like to have this session be open to questions kind of throughout, and I'm going to try to remember myself to stop periodically. What we're really going to be focusing on a lot for this session is a lot of background to really kind of get you situated if you're newer to the NIMAC, not entirely familiar with what the project is about. I'm really hoping that this will give you a good grounding in that, as well as understanding what the role of an accessible media producer account is in working with the NIMAC. So let's go ahead and launch right into it. Basically, today's webinar is going to start out with some pretty good introductory material and background for you. And then the second part will be a system demo. And so the system demo part is a little bit of an accordion. If we need a little more time for the first section, that's totally fine, because we can kind of modify the demo just kind of based on what we have time for during that section. So getting into the background and basics of the project, basically the NIMAC was created by IDEA 2004. This was a piece of legislation in the early 2000s, and we were established to be the national source file repository for K-12 textbooks and instructional materials. And so the role of the NIMAC is really to exist as a repository. We receive files from publishers. We make these files available to states for use in producing accessible formats for students in elementary and secondary education. At this time, we have received file sets from 166 publishers, and we are fast approaching 70,000 files in the repository. All 50 states, plus the 6 eligible territories, have chosen to work with the NIMAC, so no matter where you are in the United States, we are working with your state. Another important acronym when talking about the NIMAC is NIMAS. One rule of thumb here, or one way that you can easily remember this, is that NIMAC, as in cat, that's NIMAC. The C stands for center. That's how you can remember that the NIMAC is the repository. NIMAS, that stands for the standard, the technical specification. So S is for standard, C is for center, and that's an easy way to keep those apart. NIMAS was also created under IDEA, and this is the file format that the NIMAC is to receive. The important thing about NIMAS is that it is an XML-based source file format. And when we talk about source file, what we basically mean is that it requires further conversion work into an accessible format before it is used. It is supposed to be the starting point for an accessible format. It is not an accessible format for distribution to students as the source file format. So for this reason, we do not generally work directly with individual students and teachers and schools. We work with folks who produce accessible formats such as Braille transcribers and organizations like Bookshare and the American Printing House for the Blind. Another important piece here about NIMAS is that since this is a specification that was, again, it was created in that IDEA legislation. It's based on the DAISY standard, so it was based on a specification that already existed. But the NIMAC file format itself is not something that is automatically produced when print or digital books are created by publishers. And so this is pretty important in terms of the whole way that we work with states, the way that states work with publishers, because NIMAC is not a format that publishers have on hand. It's not something that you could just call up a publisher and say, hey, send me your NIMAC file, because they're just not going to have those. NIMAC is actually created as a separate process after print books or digital books are finalized. And so as a separate piece of that, technically, publishers, for the most part, also themselves, they don't produce NIMAC. They don't really have the expertise to produce NIMAC. They generally outsource this work. Well, actually, virtually all of them outsource this work to digital content conversion vendors who specialize in taking one kind of file format and turning it into another type of file format. So, so basically, if we don't have a file in the NIMAC and we have to request that it be produced, and I'll talk a little bit later about why we might do that and how we do that, but it can take several weeks and sometimes up to 6 weeks or more for us to receive a NIMAC file if we're asking for it and it's not something that is already in the conversion pipeline. So with that in mind, the really important thing with regard to how we get files is that under IDEA 2004, there's only one mechanism to require NIMAC from the publisher, and that is the adoption contract or purchase agreement. Under IDEA, there was no blanket requirement for publishers to submit files to the NIMAC for anything. The power was put 100% into the hands of customers. And so the positive side of that is that customers get to decide what should be in the NIMAC. That's the decision that they make when they choose the books that are going to be used in schools. But the caveat there is that states and districts have to include this language in their contracts in order for us to receive the files. Now, states and districts have had the ability to require NIMAC in their contracts since the summer of 2006. So it's been in place for a long time. But we do occasionally still hear that it's not always being requested, and I think there's some different logistical reasons why that can happen. So that procurement piece is something that's on our radar. It's something that is very important to us. But ultimately, the goal is that when you include NIMAC in a contract, that file is already going to be available in NIMAC when a need is identified. So ideally, the idea is the state or the district purchases materials, they include the requirement in that contract. The publisher produces the NIMAC files and sends them to us. And then if a Braille book or other accessible format is needed, we're already going to have that file, and boom, that provider can log in, get access to that file and begin producing that accessible format right away. In terms of the types of materials we receive, this is another important definition that is provided for us in the legislation. And there are several pieces to the formal definition that's found in IDEA. But the bottom line in terms of the materials is that we are able to receive a wide range of student-facing instructional materials. So we receive textbooks, workbooks, supplementary readers, ancillary materials such as Blackline Masters, again, in accordance with the contracts between the customers and the publishers. But there are some categories that are under IDEA exempt from NIMAC, and one of the big categories is teacher-facing materials. So we do not receive ancillaries that are only for use by the teacher. We don't receive teachers' editions of textbooks. IDEA was also not retroactive in terms of NIMAC for materials already being used in schools. This becomes less and less of an issue the more the time passes, but occasionally we still will get folks who reach out and say, I need NIMAC for this book that was published in 2002, and we have to let them know, we're not able to get NIMAC for those titles that were published or purchased before the NIMAC went into effect. Trade books are also exempt. The language in the legislation is we are to accept materials published primarily for use in in education, in elementary or secondary education, so trade books are generally exempt. The flip side of that is that many trade books are already available either in Braille from NLS or from Bookshare, in digital formats from Learning Ally, or sometimes even often commercial ebook formats or commercial audio. So that's trade books. College textbooks, this can sometimes be a gray area because there are some materials that are repurposed for higher level high school classes and are also used in college. But for the most part, we do not receive materials from college publishers or higher education imprints. And we also don't receive reference books. We can now accept NIMAC files for some digital instructional materials. This is a change that happened in 2020 in May, and we have not yet received many files for digital materials, and this is an area that we are continuing to kind of work on to provide some technical assistance around so that we can begin receiving more of those materials. Student eligibility is also an important piece of how the NIMAC works with states and how states serve their students. Materials produced from NIMAC can only be distributed to qualifying students in elementary or secondary education. And these students have to have both an IEP and a certified disability under the NLS guidelines. If you have any other questions about that, let us know. We are actually not directly involved in determining eligibility for any students. That is a responsibility that falls to the districts. But if you have any questions about that or are looking for materials for students who don't fall under that umbrella, feel free to reach out and we'd be happy to try and assist you in locating other materials. NIMAC is not available for use on behalf of students who are outside the US or the eligible territories, so that's another important limitation in terms of using these files. One question that we do occasionally get is that, I've got a student at a community college, they're taking a remedial course. Can we obtain the NIMAC file? Can we obtain the NIMAC file for use on behalf of that student? NIMAC cannot be accessed for use on behalf of students in higher education. However, there is a separate program called the Access Text Network, which is a great program that helps provide accessible digital files to students in higher education. That program does work directly through DSS offices at colleges and universities. They don't work directly with accessible media producers, but if you happen to be producing Braille for a kid in college, you might want to reach out to their DSS office if you're needing a digital file to support that work.
Nicole, before you move on from this section, Jay had sent a question asking if there have been any updates or revisions to IDEA 2004. And I think you touched a little bit on the notice of interpretation. I didn't know if there was anything else that would fall under that umbrella to mention.
Right. Well, as probably a lot of folks are aware, IDEA is well overdue for reauthorization. There have not actually been new regs for IDEA that I'm aware of. And again, the legislation itself, basically the way that it was supposed to work is that IDEA 2004 came out, and in theory, after about 5 years, Congress was going to revisit that legislation and reauthorize that. So that would have been around 2009, which is over 10 years ago. And so we're still waiting for that to happen. We don't have a timeline for when that's going to happen. But it's an important question, and it's an important piece, especially when we're thinking about the definitions, the file format, and all of these other parameters for NIMAC and for the NIMAC that are basically encoded in that legislation itself. So when I think about reauthorization and some of the opportunities there, we definitely have kind of our own little wish list of things that we would like to see addressed and changed, but we're not there yet. We're not there yet. So yeah, thanks for that. Are there any other questions before we move on?
That was the only one. Thank you.
Great, sure. So the next thing I want to talk about is how the NIMAC works with states. Basically, there is a fairly hierarchical way that our project works with states that decide to coordinate with us. It's an important thing to note that under IDEA, states don't have to work with the NIMAC. It's optional. They can decide that they're going to just work directly with states and get their accessible materials, or excuse me, NIMAS files directly from publishers. For obvious reasons that's not super appealing to the states. It's like it's much easier to just work with the repository and not kind of reinvent the wheel out there on your own. So basically, when states do coordinate with the NIMAC, they designate a person at the state Department of Education, generally, who is going to serve as the state coordinator for that state. And the role of that person is basically to designate authorized users for that state and to manage those users. Because NIMAS, again, isn't distributed directly to schools or students, the number of authorized users for each state is usually pretty small. It's generally 5 or fewer. And authorized users are folks who come from within the educational structure of the state. They might be at an instructional resource center or a school for the blind or at the Department of Education or some other agency. And they're basically folks who are either directly involved in or who manage accessible format production for K through 12 students. So in terms of authorized users, authorized user, when we talk about authorized users and accessible media producers, one of the things that I like to highlight is just that an authorized user might actually also be an accessible media producer, but we have 2 different types of accounts for working with the NIMAC. So we just like to get that clarified out of the gate in terms of when we talk about authorized user versus accessible media producer, we're talking less about the work that they do and just about the type of account that they have. So an authorized user account provides full access to the NIMAC repository. These folks can search and download files directly to their computer, and they can also assign files for download to registered accessible media producers who have an account with the NIMAC. The limitation of an authorized user is that they have to be designated by a state coordinator, and their access in terms of the use of NIMAS is limited to work on behalf of students in that specific state. So AMPs, for folks who have an AMP account, what do those accounts do? Well, these are users who cannot directly search and download any file from the repository. They can search, but they cannot download any file from the repository. They are only able to download files assigned to them by an authorized user. Now, the positive side of this, though, is that AMP accounts are freely available. You can be a nonprofit, you could be a for-profit provider, you could be somebody who works only for one state, or you could work for many states or nationwide. They are users that don't have to be designated by any state coordinator, and they can do work on behalf of any state. So at this point, after hearing that information, you might be thinking, well, should I be an AMP or should I be an authorized user? So if you would answer yes to these questions, an AMP account is probably a good fit for you. The first question is, do you work on behalf of one or more states or districts to produce Braille or other accessible formats for students in K through 12? The second one is, do you use NIMAS or are you learning to use NIMAS in your production processes? And the third is, do you produce a relatively small number of titles and need only periodic access to download files? If you can answer yes to all of those, then an AMP account is probably going to be something that's beneficial for you. In some cases, though, you may need to be, or it may be a better fit for you to be an authorized user. So the considerations there is if you have a really large workload and you have a lot of files that you're going to be needing to access from the system for a specific state, it might be better to be an authorized user. In that case, you do need to be from the educational of the state or a nonprofit that qualifies as an authorized entity under CHAFE. If you're not sure what that means, contact us and we're happy answer any questions or provide more information about that. But the bottom line is that you would have to be designated by the specific state coordinator to have that type of account. Registering as an AMP, if you are not yet registered and you're thinking about it, it's actually a pretty easy process. To start off, all you have to do is send us an email at nimac@aph.org with your name, email address, and your organization name. If you happen to be an independent transcriber and you don't have an organization name per se, just put whatever form of your, whatever you would want to be shown to authorized users in an alphabetical list if they were going to pick you out to assign a file to you. So in other words, if I'm John Doe and I want to register, maybe I would put my organization name as John Doe Independent Transcriber or something like that. Just some way that you will remember so that you can tell your authorized users and in a format that is unique as well. So you wouldn't just want it to be Braille transcriber, because there might be many Braille transcribers out there and you want to be uniquely identifiable in the system. So once we have those three things, name, email address, organization name, we enter a registration in the system, and that generates an automated email to you that has a link for you to go in and complete the registration. So one of the important things about this, most of that information is straightforward. You've probably seen it a million times when you've registered for various things online. But one of the things that is a little bit unique about registering with the NIMAC is that there is a part that asks about your format capabilities. And this is just simply as a convenience of communication between you and authorized users. This is information that authorized users will be able to view in the system. And it's also something that they'll be able to include when they assign a file to you. They'll be able to say, and this is the format that I would like to have produced. So when you're going through that, there'll be a field where you can actually click on the different things that you are able to, if it's digital Braille, UEB, embossed Braille, UEB, or what have you. You will just kind of pick from those choices to include that information in your account. I just would make a side note that not all formats or that can be produced from NIMAS are included on that list, because there are a lot of different digital formats, for example, that may not be specified on that. So you can also just choose other if you happen to produce formats that are not included on the pick list. The other thing that will happen when you receive that automated email is that it will also have an attachment, which is the limitation of use agreement. And so what we ask you to do for that, this is just kind of a standard agreement that says that you will comply by copyright, you will comply by the rules in IDEA in terms of how the files are used and how the materials are distributed. So you just need to initial each page and then complete section 14.0 and return the document to us. The limitation of use agreement is one document that we use for both authorized users and for accessible media producers, but as an accessible media producer, 14.0 is the only section that you need to worry about filling out and signing. If you have a way to provide a digital signature, such as DocuSign, we can accept those, and it's fine to send us either an email digital version or you can mail in the hard copy. Either one is fine. But once we have the online registration and the limitation of use agreement, we can activate your account. As a side note, if you have been in the field for a while, or if you work with APH much, you may be aware of such a thing called the AMP directory. And this is something that is actually separate from registering with the NIMAC. And it's a way that you can get the word out through a publicly searchable website about the services that you offer. So just like to kind of make that clear that when you register for the NIMAC, your information is not shared with the public. It is made available to authorized users through their accounts. They can log in and get access to information about you, but we do not publish this to the whole world. If you're interested, though, in sharing information and making it easy for folks to find you, we do encourage you to participate in the AMP database or the AMP directory. It is free, doesn't cost anything, and you can just email resource@aph.org for more information about that. Okay, any questions as of now? Before we move on and talk a little bit about AMP accounts and being assigned files. Okay.
Someone in the chat, someone in the chat did ask if this was going to be recorded and made available later. So I did, and I'm not sure we said it out loud, but we could just repeat it. Yes, this is going to be archived on our website, so you'll be able to access it later, as well as the PowerPoint will be there for you also.
Great, thanks, Liz.
Hi, this is Pam. Is it okay to ask something? Okay.
Sure, yes.
Okay, great. I do want to go back to the eligibility, and you talked about the IEP. We've recently had some queries come up around private schools for which the student has an ISP. If this isn't the appropriate time to discuss that, please feel free to let me know. But what is the relationship there? I mean, does NIMAC provide to private schools? What are the rules around a student's situation there?
Right. Yeah, and the answer to that is that there are some private schools who will work with their school district to provide IEPs for students, but that's something that happens between the private school and the district. The requirement of the IEP is actually written in the legislation, so there's just not any wiggle room for that. At least not at this time. You know, as kind of a side note, I think that there's some buzz out there about the possibility of some 504 regs being modified, and so we're kind of paying a lot of attention to that to see if that might be an opportunity to try and wrap 504 kids into NIMAS. But at this time, the IEP requirement is just, it's a part of the legislation, and I don't think an ISP is quite the same thing, but I'd be happy to talk with you more about it later if you have other questions. But for the most part, because of that IEP requirement and because most private schools don't work with the local district to put those in place, it's generally not, NIMAS is generally not an option for those students, and other alternatives have to be explored.
Really helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure, sure. So moving on now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the process of NIMAS file assignment, because what we talked about before is that once you have an active AMP account, any authorized user in any state can assign you files for download. So as another aside, the NIMAC itself is not involved in any business arrangements between states and districts and AMPs. And so, you know, we would expect that for the most part, if you're working on a project, you know, you may be working on a project for a state or a district, but that person doesn't happen to be an authorized user in that particular state. So if you need help locating an authorized user for a project that you are working on, just let us know. We're happy to help you get put in touch with those folks. So basically the way file assignment works is that authorized user, they have a login and password for their account. They log in, they search for the file using an ISBN or whatever search, and from within their account, they can select that item, choose you from a pick list, choose the format that they want from a pick list, and send that off, and magically that file is assigned and then becomes available for you to download when you log into your account. So again, they're going to pick you out from an alphabetical list by organization name. So you just want to kind of keep that in mind. It doesn't come up very often, but every now and then we've had somebody will call and say, I tried to assign this file to this person and I can't find them in there. And it turned out that the AMP told the authorized user a different name from how they were in the system. So you just want to have it be something that's easy for authorized users to find and easy for you to remember. So again, that requested format and the format capabilities, this is really more or less it's provided as a convenience for communicating with the authorized user. And, you know, they are going to make this choice. That information, though, it doesn't restrict you to producing that accessible format. So say, for example, you've got somebody who wants you to produce EPUB and large print and Braille, but you can only choose one accessible format. You know, they can only choose one accessible format when they're assigning the file. That doesn't matter. You know, you do what you need to do with that file. What I would say is that if you have a priority list, because of the importance of having information about Braille production, you know, it tends to be the format that is most labor intensive and most costly to produce. I would say that if somebody has asked you to produce Braille and another format, that when they provide that request or when they send you that file assignment, that they choose the Braille as the one that is in the system. And the reason for this is that if you are an authorized user and you go in to assign that file, one of the things that you can do as an authorized user, you won't see this in your AMP account, but if you were an authorized user, you could actually go in there and see what other organizations have been assigned the file. And this is something that's very intentional that we built into the system so that, for example, if you are thinking, I'm going to outsource and have Braille produced for this particular item, you know, at that point of assigning the file, you can actually go in there, and if somebody else has already assigned that file, then you can kind of see that and say, oh, well, maybe I don't really want to be paying for someone else to produce Braille from scratch if it's already being produced by another organization. As a side note, the LUI database of accessible materials, it's lui.aph.org. This is another place that we always recommend that folks go. It includes information on Braille and other accessible formats from about 75 or 80 different organizations. And it also includes a unified search that includes Bookshare, NIMAC, and Learning Ally. And so that's also a really good place to go to find out what is available. And it also does include information when we receive it. We also include information from agencies about what they have started working on, even if it's not completed yet, so that people will have that information. So a little note here about emails and how important emails are in terms of the way that the NIMAC system works. Basically, when you're assigned a file by an authorized user, the system is going to send you an automated email to let you know. And in that email, again, it's going to tell you who that person was, the material that they've requested, and then again, that accessible format that they chose from the pick list of your format capabilities. So this is important. One of the things just to keep us on top of the data and that kind of thing is that your information in the system, you can't edit that yourself. That is something that we have to edit for you. So we just, if you do have a change to your email address or some other contact information change, let us know. We're happy to take care of that for you. So this is just a screen capture of an actual file assignment email, just showing you all the information. It's going to just say this title has been requested to produce in this format, and then it does provide you with the name, email address, and the phone number of the authorized user. So if you have any questions or if it sounds like a mistake, you can easily get in touch with that authorized user to follow up. The other thing that happens with this is that as activity online has become more and more nefarious, spam filters have become stronger and stronger. And so this can sometimes cause headaches when people are trying to work with automated emails like the ones that come from the NIMAC. One of the workarounds, if you're finding that emails are getting filtered or they're going to your spam, is you may want to include no reply -NIMAC at overdrive.com in your email contacts. This is, we call it whitelisting, and usually that will take care of any issues because it basically tells your email server these are legit, they're okay, please let them through. But if you encounter issues, let us know, or you may need to contact your IT department if we're not able to resolve the issue. And one final note in terms of the email notifications, and that is just that if you delete one by mistake or it does get lost somewhere, all of the information that's provided is also available to you in the system. So you don't have to worry about, you know, it's not going to prevent you from downloading a file or anything else if you lose that email. But on the other hand, having those emails come through successfully just keeps you from having to log in and check. If you're waiting on a file, you'll get the notification rather than having to keep logging in and is it there yet? Is it there yet? It just takes the guesswork out. So the last thing that I want to talk a little bit about before we move to the demo is just a few system features and services for AMPs. And specifically, we're going to talk about the watch list, and then we're going to just talk real briefly about Mathml. So the watch list, this is basically a free service that the NIMAC provides to research and try to expedite files if there are materials that you need, but you don't see them in the NIMAC. And, you know, and part of the reason for this is that, you know, ideally, as I mentioned before, when things are required in a contract, we will have the material when you need them. Well, sometimes that contract language might not have been there, or it might be in one of those, you know, the book that is needed might be in one of those exempt categories, and it can be kind of, you know, it can be very difficult sometimes to know, should this be in the NIMAC or not? Well, we can just really take the guesswork out of the equation for you. You know, we'll research the item for you, and if the title is within scope, we will reach out to the publisher to ask if we can get the material and try to expedite NIMAS for it. And if it's outside of scope, we'll research and try to find other alternatives for you. The other advantage to putting an ISBN on your watch list when you need it, or if you need it and it's not in the NIMAC, is that you'll also receive an automated email once the file is available in the NIMAC, letting you know that that it is there. Now, again, the fact that you get that automated email doesn't mean that the file is ready for you to download in your file assignments. It just means that you can be assigned the file because it's available in the NIMAC. So just wanted to clarify that. The other thing that I wanted to talk really briefly about is just Mathml and NIMAS. And Mathml is optional markup for math and scientific notation that can be provided in the XML for NIMAS files. And so the big benefit of Mathml is that if you have software that supports it, it can be used to automatically generate Braille or other accessible formats. And so that's kind of the benefit. Historically, math in printed books and in NIMAS files has been provided as images. And as we know, images at this point cannot automatically be converted into Braille. They just can't. So Mathml can be really advantageous if you are able to work with it. Now, many publishers do provide Mathml in their files now. We're getting an increasing number of files with it. It's becoming more and more common, which is great, but not all software supports Mathml or supports it to the same degree. Braille Blaster can support Mathml, conversion into Mathml to Nemeth or to UEB Math. It's not perfect, but it does have that capability. But if you are working with a NIMAS file that has Mathml and you know that your software doesn't support Mathml, or it's not a workflow that you are really set up to work with, you can choose to download the file without the Mathml. Basically, what we've done is we've built a way for the system to strip out the Mathml. It's going to provide you images instead of the Mathml, and you would just be working with the file as if it never had Mathml to start with. And we'll take a look at that during the demo. So the other thing that I want to just talk about real quickly is ways that you can figure out whether the file has Mathml, because that's going to be something that's important to you. Well, luckily there are several different ways for you to know. The first one is that if you are going to download a file that's one of your assigned files, if it includes Mathml, you will see an option to download the file without the Mathml, and you'll only see that no Mathml option if Mathml is present in the file. It's not going to show up for all files, only for the ones that have Mathml. But you can also look at the full system record, or actually the XML file itself. Those are two other ways. So here we have a screenshot of that dialog that shows the no Mathml option circled. That's where you're going to see that when you're actually going to download the file in the system. The other possibility here is that if you are in the system and you're looking at the full record, metadata record, and I'll show you that in the demo as well, you're going to see at the very bottom of the column to the right, because the way that the metadata records are structured, you have kind of some metadata on the right and then a second, or metadata on the left and then a second column on the right. Well, the Mathml is going to be the last field on the right-hand side at the very bottom. And again, if you don't see that there is not any Mathml. If there is Mathml, that's where it's going to show up. And then the third possibility here is that if you've already downloaded the file and you don't want to go back and look again in the NIMAC to find out, all you have to do is open up your XML file. And if you see a bunch of references to Mathml at the top of that XML file, that's going to show you that, yes, Mathml is present. This kind of information is not going to be present in an XML file that doesn't include Mathml. So those are the three ways that, that you can find out whether the file has Mathml in it. In terms of working with NIMA's files, accessible media producers generally rely on proprietary software, or in some cases, software that they have developed themselves to produce accessible formats. And so for the most part, the NIMAC is not generally involved in providing training on using third-party software or setting up production workflows, but we were very pleased recently to be able to offer 2 training courses for Braille transcribers. And so one of these was a 6-session course for those who use Braille 2000, and another was a 6-session course for folks who use Duxbury. And I just wanted to make a note. I think there are probably folks who are participating today who were a part of those trainings, and thank you if you joined us for those. I wanted to let you know that these will remain available free of charge on the APH Hive and the NIMAC website, and eventually it will be possible to get that continuing education credit by doing the course through the APH Hive. It's going to take a little bit longer for that to get posted there, but we are going to very soon have those archived on the NIMAC website to be available to folks going forward. Related to those courses, one of the things that we noticed was that there was just a lot of really productive conversation happening kind of behind the scenes in the chat while the presentations were going on. And so one of the things that we're considering to keep the conversation going is setting up a couple of transcriber user groups, one for Duxbury users and one for Braille 2000 users, to help to kind of keep that communication and that ongoing support happening. And so kind of our preliminary idea around this is that they would be relatively informal. We would try to have them facilitated by a skilled transcriber with whichever software is the focus of the group, possibly meeting on a bi-monthly or quarterly basis, and just basically to provide an opportunity for transcribers to connect with each other, share information and tips and pointers on textbook transcription. So this is just kind of a pitch to send out there that if you like that idea, if you think that that would be beneficial, let us know. Send us an email at nimac@aph.org if you'd like to see us pursue this, or if you have any ideas about, hey, I've got some really good ideas about how this could really benefit transcribers and how you might organize or structure this. So do let us know about that. So before I move on to the demo part, I just wanted to make a little pitch. This is actually where I'm going to start with the demo is with our informational website as the landing spot. But I did want to just provide here a little circle that shows accessible media producers page highlighted on our website. This is the NIMAC.us informational website, and we archive, this is where this presentation will be archived, and the PowerPoint will be downloadable from there as well. And so if you've never been to NIMAC.us, we invite you to take a look and check out some of the resources that we have available there. And with that, I'm going to move on to a live demo if there are, but let's stop real quick if there are any questions.
Yeah, I did. Jay had sent a question asking about which Braille software support Mathml right now. And my understanding after the trainings is that Braille Blaster supports Mathml, and that there's some support within NIMPro, which is used with Duxbury, but that Braille 2000 is still working on their updates to their math support. Do you have any more information than that, Nicole? I think that's my understanding.
Yeah, well, I think yeah, I think that the support in NIMPro and Duxbury, it seemed like it was fairly limited.
Mm-hmm.
I think in theory with Braille Blaster, it's supposed to be pretty far along, but there may be some bugs that need to be reported. So I would say if you're really interested in checking out you know, the Braille conversion from Mathml, I would definitely give Braille Blaster a try and let us know. I mean, and we're happy to, you know, if you're using NIMAS especially, we want to know about that experience if you are finding that there are issues or you're finding that it's buggy, because it's something that we really would like to have it work, and we would like to really encourage APH to continue working on that software. So yeah, thanks for asking about that.
Yeah.
So the next thing that I'm going to do, again, I'm here at the NIMAC website, and I just want to kind of point out that from the website here, this is where you can go to the accessible media producers page and get to frequently asked questions, and again, some archived materials on that site. And from here, you can always search the NIMAC before you log in. If you are interested in doing that, you can always go to our public search. You don't have to have an account to search the NIMAC. You can just search it. And this search will actually be the same search that you have available to you in your account, just as a heads up on that. If we have enough time, we may take a quick look at the search later on. And from here, you can also just log into your account. And what I'm going to do now is log into a test account for an accessible media producer test account. What you're basically going to see when you log in is you're going to see up in the upper right, you're going to see some menu options. You're going to see a search box there for the search. And again, for our purposes, that search you can search. You won't be able to download those items, but you're always able to search. But then the main content of your landing page is going to be your title assignments. And so this is basically any authorized user that assigns you a file. This is where they're going to show up. And you're going to see that there's kind of a grid format here where for each thing that has been assigned to you, there's going to be some title details that include the title, the NIMAS identifier, and the publisher. One column over, you're going to see the format that has been assigned. The next column over, you're going to see the authorized user who assigned the file. Then you're going to see the date assigned. And then if you've downloaded the file, you'll also see the date downloaded. And so another thing here, just in terms of housekeeping and display, is that you are able to use the little triangles next to the right in each column so that you can basically sort this information any way that you want. You also have an option here. You'll see there's a gray box that says generate queue report. You can download your queue at any time if you want to see a little quick report of your file assignments. That's an option for you. And another housekeeping thing that you will see here in the main part of your page is you will see that there is a tab for active queue and a tab for completed queue. Completed queue is just basically a place where if you're finished with something, you can take it out of your active queue just as kind of a little housekeeping sort of thing. You cannot actually permanently delete any of your file assignments. They're always there. They always stay there. They live in your account for as long as your account exists. But the completed queue is an option to place things if you just want to keep things a little tidier in your active queue. The other thing that you're going to see here over to the right is a little box, and it's a little bit subtle because it's kind of light, but it's a search within. And this is just an option if you have several things or a bunch of things in your either your active queue or completed queue. You can do a little search for an item in there to just really zero in on that file assignment. So that's just kind of a handy thing that you might want to do. So in a moment, we're going to talk about the actual downloading part. But before we do that, I just want to kind of come up and talk a little bit more about some of these options that are up here in the upper right. And one of them under user information, I talked before about if you go to my account, this is information that you actually can't edit on your own. But if you need to make changes, let us know and we can help you out with that. But this is where you can kind of go and review if your format capabilities change, if there's a format that you no longer produce or a new format that you do produce and you want us to include it. This is where you're going to be able to see all of your existing format capabilities. And so if there's something that should be added, let us know. Same thing in terms of any organizational information, if your address or phone number changes or that kind of thing. You can also change your password from this screen if you want to do that. That's just another thing that you can do from there. So that's the My Account information there. You also have the option as an accessible media producer. We're not going to go into detail really about it today, but if you are at an organization where you would like multiple folks to be able to access your AMP account, you have an option to do that by creating sub-users to your account. And it's really straightforward and pretty intuitive. And this is where you would go to do that. In terms of navigating through your account, you can always go back to title assignments or your landing page by either clicking title assignments or just by clicking the NIMAC logo in the upper left-hand corner. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the downloading and managing your file assignments. We talked a little bit already about the completed queue versus the active queue. And when you select one of the items, you can select one or more items at a time to either add to your downloads or to move to the completed queue. So this is what we would click if we wanted something to go to the completed queue. And we can move things back and forth between active and completed. If it's in completed, you can't download it from there. But if you determine that you need to download it again, all you have to do is move it back. So it's pretty straightforward. So what we're going to do now is just go ahead and add this particular item to our download queue. And what this just basically means is we're going to request it, and then it's going to appear in my downloads when the processing is complete. So what happens at this point is we're going to get this dialog. And as I mentioned before, in this case, we see a no Mathml download option. So if we didn't want it, we wouldn't have to download it. And then we can also download the full download with Mathml and with images, or the XML download, which will not include images. And this is actually the images versus no images basically is because a lot of times Braille transcribers will not necessarily need the images or not need them right away, and not including the images really makes the download process more quickly, and it's just a much smaller file set. So they're just easier to work with. If you don't need the images, you don't have to download them at that time. So I click that I agree. This basically, the information that you find in this dialog is the exact same information that's in the limitation of use agreement that you signed. So you don't, if you read it once, you don't really need to read it again, but it is there in case you want to read it again. Once I click I agree, what's going to happen now is if I go to my downloads, this is where that download is going to show up once it is ready for me to download. And it's ready immediately because this was a really really quick processing file. But just as kind of a heads up of what is happening when we click that submit button and it's processing, if it's a larger file, when I come to my downloads, I might actually see under actions here, I might actually get a note that either says pending or processing, which means that it's still server side, going through the process there at Overdrive to be delivered to the My Downloads page. And so what's happening here after you make that request is this is where the DRM for NIMAC happens. Every file that is downloaded from the system is fingerprinted and watermarked at the point of download. And what that basically means is that there's invisible code that is added to the file that identifies the user who downloaded it and the date and time that the file was downloaded, and also identifies the NIMAC as the source of that NIMAC file. So, so that's basically what's happening. You make the request, and so all of that is happening at that point, which is why it can be a longer process if it's a really big file. Another thing that I'll just mention here is that you do have an option if you would like to be emailed when a requested file is ready for download. You can choose that here, but most of the time the processing is going to be pretty quick. One final note before we jump off of this particular topic, and that is simply that if you have a status of pending or processing under actions here instead of download, that's not going to refresh automatically. You will have to actually refresh your browser window in order to get that to update. The browser is just not going to know when that changes. And once you're finished with a download, again, if you need to download a file again, you always can do that. You can kind of keep your My Downloads page tidy by deleting after you've downloaded, but the system will also automatically remove the downloads from this page after 30 days just to keep it cleaned out. And if you need to download again after that, of course you can. So the last thing I want to talk about just real briefly, we mentioned the watch list, and I just want to real quickly talk about that. If you have an ISBN, it can be a 10-digit ISBN or a 13-digit ISBN. If it is not in the NIMAC, all you have to do is add it to the watch list, and I'm just going to actually add a random 10-digit number. Oops. There we go. That's a 10-digit number. And basically this will automatically, we will go in, we will pull that ISBN. We do daily pulls to see what watch list items have been requested. And we will research that for you. And you will see the status in here. If you see a status that says, there are a couple of different statuses here. You will not ever see a status of certified when you add something to the watch list because it will prevent you from adding a certified file. It'll just tell you this is already available. But after a file is certified, if you go in here, you may see that it says certified. But you will have received the email letting you know that before you get to this page. So if there's a status that says awaiting corrections, that means that it has been received, but it had errors and we had to request some corrections from the publisher. And then there's another one that's that indicates that it's in the file review queue. In any case, if you get those messages, then those are actually really good news because we can generally always expedite those if they have been received, even if they're awaiting corrections. We can try to get those to you really quickly. So that's the watch list. Are there any questions about anything that we have covered, or looks like we've got a couple more questions? I'm sorry, a couple more minutes left. Are there any questions from folks?
Deborah put one in the chat about asking if there was like a sample book that she could download as a test file. So I shared the link to the NIMAC exemplars page at the Ames Center site.
Great.
And yeah, there are several sample files there that you all can are freely downloadable and you can check out.
Yeah, thanks. And that is a good point. That if you're new and you're wanting to do a couple of tests, those exemplars they're a really good starting point. They're pretty. The nice thing about them too is that they're pretty small. They're not going to be overwhelming. But I think there's one that's kind of social studies, and then there's the one about coyotes. a book about coyotes, I think.
Yeah, coyotes.
Yeah. Now, I will say that there's a Mathml exemplar, but it only actually includes one equation, so it's not actually a math book. So, so that's not super helpful if you're troubleshooting or trying to see, you know, to what extent your software can work with Mathml. But the other exemplars can be pretty useful for that. So, anything else? Any other questions?
I'm not seeing any. So in the chat now, I'm going to put our exit survey link. This is something that's really helpful to us. It's a super short survey. It'll just take you 1 minute to complete, and that feedback's very valuable to us. Yes,
We thank you profusely for just taking a quick moment to do that for us. It's really important for our reporting to the Department of Education, and it's just very helpful to us. And so, so with that, I'll just say thanks again for joining us this afternoon. If we can be of any help at all, please do reach out to us, and we're happy to help you. If you are wanting to set up an account or need any other type of assistance, just feel free to get in touch. So thanks so much again for being with us this afternoon, and have a great rest of the day.